Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 10th thematic session of the 2022 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction on Building Resilience Through Recovery. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to everybody joining us online from around the world. My name is Heidi Scroderus-Fox, and I am the Acting High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. Today's session will explore how to develop and finance risk-informed recovery plans and programs, ensuring the resilience of economies and societies to future shocks and hazards. This year's global platform is particularly important as it will provide input to the midterm review of the Sendai framework. As outlined in Priority 4 of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction phase of disasters is critically important opportunity to build back better. It is therefore critical to be prepared for recovery ahead of a disaster. Recovery and rehabilitation provide transformative opportunities amidst loss and destruction. Recovery is an important opportunity to achieve sustainable development policy objectives by injecting a risk-informed and prevention-oriented approach. Risk-informed recovery policies and investments can help countries address the underlying social, economic, and environmental risk drivers that create vulnerability and exposure. However, today's reality is that preparedness to build back better remains limited and is usually addressed only as a post-disaster consideration. More needs to be done to allocate necessary resources and develop capacity for recovery actions that build resilience and reduce risk across all sectors. Only 90% of disaster-related international support is allocated to emergency response, with a mere 6% to reconstruction and rehabilitation. The DRR policy space is at crossroads. Decision makers and investors have a unique opportunity to accelerate action and put the world on a path for inclusive, resilient, green, and sustainable future. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Asako Okai, who is Assistant Secretary General and Director of UNDP's.
Communities and countries restore their livelihoods, businesses, and assets. This process should not only rebuild basic services and infrastructure, but also strengthen their institutional systems and capacities to prevent and mitigate the adverse impact of future crises. Recovery, therefore, is an inclusive set of interventions which improves the well-being of all people. At the 5th World Reconstruction Conference concluded earlier this week, we deliberated on the theme of reconstruction for a sustainable future and building resilience for recovery, and laid out 6 action points for resilient recovery. We have agreed on a range of support services to help communities recover and build their resilience, and emphasize the need for predictable financing, institutions, and systems to support post-crisis recovery. I would like to elaborate first on the point of building resilience of communities, and then on the issues of establishing systems for financing recovery. Resilient recovery needs to be planned well. That it is critical that we have a comprehensive recovery strategy that will ensure the restoration of livelihood, rebuilding of critical infrastructure, and greater community preparedness to withstand future risks. Such a strategy must be evidence-based, and investment should be made after an assessment of the damage, loss, and recovery needs. UNDP works closely with national disaster management agencies to strengthen its risk governance capacities and other sector ministries to ensure that multi-hazard and multi-dimensional risk approach is taken in planning recovery. After Hurricanes Maria and Irma, UNDP supported Dominica's effort to developing a national climate resilience strategy, and its subsequent implementation addresses multidimensional risks aimed for a sustainable future. Government should also establish shock responsive social action programs, providing support to the most vulnerable. As a critical component of national social protection systems, cash transfers can generate strong economic and social returns, including preventing or minimizing risks facing poor households. In reality, countries have limited access to finances for recovery. They may have a contingent budget to respond to the crisis and address immediate life-saving needs. Several countries mobilize funds through donor conferences. However, except for a few large-scale disasters, almost no country has been able to fully fund recovery. There are several measures that can and must be taken to finance recovery. First and foremost, it is important to discuss and determine in advance priorities for recovery and systems for disbursement and utilization of funds. 90% of recovery resources tend to be used for reconstruction of large public infrastructure, leaving the most affected people with little support. It is important to have guidance for directing resources to those who need it most. Second, budgetary allocation for social protection must increase, and support for livelihood should be prioritized. At the local and community levels, countries should consider providing credit to women's farmers, producers, local entrepreneurs, and micro, small, and medium enterprises to stimulate and revive the local economy. Third, countries need to move from response-related funding to more predictable financing for recovery. The current practice in financing at the time of crisis is a contingency fund for response and relief activities. A well-developed public finance management strategy is needed for financing recovery that helps to deal with shocks and crises. One such tool is the Integrated National Financing Framework, INNF, which helps countries plan and overcome existing impediments to financing the SDGs at the national level. The INNF has been able to bring together a full range of public and private resources for funding the SDGs. The core benefit of having a well-developed INNF is the funds allocated toward the SDGs target and priorities decrease the impact of crisis. UNDP is proud to support INF in the 58 countries. The most recent approach for predictable financing include risk insurance facilities, cat bonds, and contingent credit facilities, and broadening the range of financing options that can be applied in the immediate aftermath to jumpstart aspects of development work. In the case of many small island nations graduating to a middle-income status, they lose eligibility to access concessional finance they still need. In this context, it becomes even more critical to develop domestic finance and partner with the private sector for resources. Moreover, remittances play an important role in funding recovery of households. Governments should facilitate simple systems for transfer of funds into the countries. Fourth, countries should be able to anticipate the scale of crisis and set aside funds for managing the impact. Anticipatory financing instruments that are based on the ability to foresee the impact of crisis allow our national government to pre-position funds to use immediately after the crisis to begin recovery activities and commence development intervention early and at scale. In the World Reconstruction Conference, the year 5, we heard the delegates from Indonesia and India share their experiences on how they dedicated resources are set aside for recovery, which states can use based on a prioritized recovery plan informed by a socio-economic assessment. And fifth, we may like to consider establishing a funding facility for recovery at the regional level for helping countries in crisis. This could be designed to help reduce debt burden and support government to significantly increase investment in basic social services, as well as provide green jobs to people. The investment objective would be to develop human capital rather than physical capital, as this is a foundational pillar for advancing development that is sustainable. The COVID pandemic has shown us the way to go. Distinguished delegates, the pathway to building resilience is to invest in people and to invest in nature. So let us go forward together with shared knowledge, sharpened foresight, and resolve to deliver resilience through recovery and to build communities with lives, livelihoods, and indeed hope, not simply restored, but renewed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Okai, for those important remarks and for setting so well the scene for our panel discussion, and also emphasizing the needs of those who are the most vulnerable, in particular small islands and least developed countries, and really recognizing the important role that UNDP is playing in supporting these countries. So thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I will introduce our panel, I would like to turn to some housekeeping matters. For those following online, to view in one of the 6 UN languages, please select the language channel in the box to the right and mute the audio from the video player. A word on participation. To hear everybody's views, we will be using Slido for polls and Q&A. In-room participants, you can connect on slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, using your mobile phones or laptops and insert the code that is shown on the room screen. For those following us online in Hop-In, please access the tab Polls and Q&A on the right-hand side menu. The poll will be launched now, and the result will be shown toward the end of this session. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelist, the Honorable Nia Batikoto Seruiratu, Minister for Defense, National Security and Policing, Rural and Maritime Development and Disaster Management of Fiji. He was previously an officer within the Republic of Fiji military forces and has served in a number of peacekeeping missions. Bula, Mr. Minister. We have then Dr. Jungwo Liu. He's a chair professor in the School of Environmental Science and Engineering at Southern University of Science and Technology in China, and a senior guest research scholar at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria. Dr. Liu is joining us online from China. Very warm welcome to you. Dr. Jamil Abu Al-Enain is General Supervisor of the General Directorate of Emergencies, Disasters, and Medical Transportation at the Ministry of Health of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He's also the General Director of the National and Regional Emergency Operations Centers. Warm welcome. And finally, Mr. Dragos Pislaru is a Romanian and a member of the European Parliament since 2019. He's chair of the Committee on Labor and Social Affairs, a member of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, and a subcommittee member on tax matters. Dragos Pislaru was the co-rapporteur of the Pandemic EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. Warm welcome. So without further ado, let's hear from our very distinguished panelists, who I ask kindly to keep your responses to about 3 to 4 minutes per question. And with that, it's my great pleasure to turn to Minister Serui Ratu. I would like to ask you, what key actions can policymakers take to embed disaster risk reduction and resilience into national and local planning for recovery? And how can we be sure recovery measures are resilient? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you my thoughts and, of course, Fiji's experiences as well. As you are all aware, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Fiji is a small island developing state and is very vulnerable. There are two things that I wish to state initially as I approach this question. One, the way we live is changing and will continue to be so. We've been confronted with climate change issues, disasters, pandemics, and the list goes on. This is what we call the new norm. Therefore, for policymakers, I would say it needs first a pragmatic approach. We cannot tackle today's issues with yesterday's attitude and paradigm. I say that again. We cannot solve today's issues with yesterday's attitude and paradigm. The problem that confronts the world today needs a pragmatic approach. We know the issues, and we need to come up with solutions, whether it involves changes in legislation, whether it involves changes in policies and strategies, changes in financing, but we need a pragmatic approach because we are all in this together and we are all affected, although disproportionately, but we need each other. SDG 17 is all about partnerships. When I talk about the new norm, there are 3 things for Fiji particularly that we had in our new development paradigm. Resilience must be at the core of our development. Therefore, thankful to the UNDP, through the Governance for Resilience program, we have a 10-year strategic development plan in the ministry. I will talk about other documents later, that is focused on risk-informed development. Let's not only do development for the sake of doing development. Development must be risk-informed, and development must have resilience at its core so that we can be in a better position to absorb the future shocks. It must be sustainable. And maybe we could add that into the question here. It's not only about resilience, but it's about sustainability as well. And of course, respecting humanitarian principles, because if we are not pragmatic and we are not decisive enough, it's people that will be affected, and people are continued to be affected when we are not doing what we are supposed to do. Secondly, This needs political will and commitment. We have ratified the Paris Agreement. We have ratified the Sendai Framework, and the list goes on. Well and good. But what we do after the meetings, we need action. And this is, the time for action is now, not later, not tomorrow, today. Let's do it. I'm speaking and I'm passionate about this because of the implications, how it has affected countries like Fiji and other small island developing states. For Fiji, as I've stated, we know the problems that we have gone through in 2019. Our Honorable Prime Minister has launched our disaster risk reduction policy. We have a policy in place because we know what the new norm is like, and of course our experiences as well. How do we know our experiences? From a very simple participatory approach, post-disaster needs assessment, recovery frameworks, and then strategic plans. These are the things that will, so for Fiji we have a national risk reduction policy, and there are about 122 action items in that, and we have a monitoring mechanism. With that comes our commitment as well. Although we have very limited resources, but government is committed because it is an investment. It's not an expense. When we invest in DRR, we will reap the benefits in the future. So government is committed to that as well. We need to have the monitoring mechanisms. Even if policies, legislations need to be changed. Some of our laws are old, archaic. That needs to be changed as well. And therefore, if I may again say, we need what's available in terms of innovations and technology. Financing is so important, and of course, hopefully, the strong partnership will see us through and take us forward. I'll leave it there, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, Excellency Minister. I think that you have made a very passionate plea. We have all heard you. We cannot solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions. We need new solutions, and we are all affected. We need action together, and we need solidarity to build resilience for everyone, resilience and sustainability for everyone. Very powerful words. Thank you very much for your intervention. Now it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Liu, who will be joining us virtually from China. Dr. Liu, we hear a lot about green recovery from COVID-19. How can recovery protect the environment while also promoting economic growth and development? The floor is yours.
Thank you, the moderator, for this question. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to share my opinions and also our Chinese stories. The COVID-19 pandemic made evident that a healthy human life depends on a healthy environment. The pandemic has resulted in many human deaths, economic disruptions, poverty, unemployment, and other problems. With such a pandemic, we need to seriously consider whether we still continue our traditional ways of economic development, or we need to find a better way to address many compounding crises we are experiencing. The answer is very clear. We need to take care of our environment in the process of economic development. In response to the compounding environmental, economic, social, and health crises, there are increasing calls for a green recovery. A green recovery brings economies out of recession through redesign to protect the environment, create jobs, increase the resilience of infrastructure, and fight against climate change. So what policies, measures, and incentives the governments need to put in place to make green and resilient recovery a reality? I want to emphasize two very important issues. First, carbon neutrality. As stated by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the scientific evidence is very clear. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. We cannot achieve a green recovery without considering climate change. Carbon neutrality is a state of net zero carbon dioxide emissions. This can be achieved by balancing emissions of CO2 with its removal or by eliminating emissions from society. China has promised to become carbon neutral before 2050 and to begin cutting its emissions within the next 10 years. The news of China's carbon neutrality target is a game changer for the global climate and could encourage other countries to act faster than we otherwise would have. China will generate most of its electricity from zero emission sources and expand the use of this clean power whenever possible. We will develop new technologies that can capture CO2 released from burning fossil fuels or biomass and store it underground, known as carbon capture and storage. The carbon neutrality policy will have a far-reaching positive impact on China's economy as well as on the world economy. The second issue is ecosystem restoration. The healthier our ecosystems are, the healthier the planet and our people. The United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration runs from 2021 to 2030. It aims to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems on every continent and in every ocean. It can help to end poverty, recover economy, combat climate change, and prevent a mass biodiversity extinction. In 2020, China also released the master plan for major projects of national important ecosystem protection and restoration. This is the first comprehensive plan involving protection and restoration of all ecosystems between 2021 and 2035. In our group, we have developed theory and technologies for stepwise ecological restoration. Stepwise ecological restoration aims to implement restorative activities by considering different levels of ecosystem degradation and financial, ecological, and institutional feasibilities. This stepwise ecological restoration has already been applied in China for restoring rivers and other ecosystems, and I also hope we can apply it in other countries through collaborations. So that's my comments. Thank you.
For those very important comments and reminding us that green recovery can bring economies out of recession. You have emphasized the issue of carbon neutrality and also restoring ecosystems. Thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure to bring in Mr. Pislaru. We know that good policies are nothing without resources to finance their implementation. What policies and incentives should we put in place to meaningfully engage the finance sector, such as investment, banking, and insurance sectors, in financing recovery that builds resilience? And what lessons can you share from the European region? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Indeed, I'm honored to be able to share with you the EU experience We all know that EU was pioneering in sustainable finance pre-COVID as well. We had a Sustainable Finance Action Plan adopted in March 2018, and that was really focusing on sustainable investment with the framework that was managing financial risk stemming from climate change, the transparency framework, and a long-term thinking that was in there. And this was integrating or referencing already the Sendai framework. But as you mentioned in the introduction, COVID-19 has changed everything, and I think this is really important to understand. When the COVID pandemic hit, was clear, at the European Union level, we had a very important choice. A choice in between austerity and each country being on its own, or a choice of solidarity. And this is how we started a very important role with a focus on recovery. It was a package called the Next Generation EU of 700 euros that has been adopted by the member states. And then out of that, there was a stimulus package called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, 672.5 billion out of it dedicated to recovery and resilience. And that's exactly the topic that we are addressing today. And here comes also the voice of the people. The European Parliament has been quite active in this co-legislation process to be sure that it's not just about money. This is not just a cash machine. The problem usually is not only about money. Money is very important, but it's also what you do with the money. And we designed a framework that has this beautiful combo of reforms and investments. Because investments, as it was very well highlighted by previous speakers, may mean infrastructure. But if you are not focusing in a balanced way on reforms, you are not going to reach those things that you need to do in addition. And also the balance of the package of the Recovery and Resilience Facility is important because we had 6 pillars, the most important pillar being exactly the one focusing on climate change, 37% of the package focusing on the green pillar. Then, of course, the digital pillar, very important. Economic competitiveness, because businesses needed to be brought in. And this is not only about public money, but also the capacity of having positive spillovers. But then, of course, very, very important is the social dimension. I'm really glad that I have this chance to talk to you about the concept that we are going to hear more and more about. It's called the social resilience or social aspects. And here the social and territorial cohesion was very important, became a pillar, then a health and institutional resilience component because we need better public administration. And then this was really something very dear for me and for the European Parliament. And as a co-rapporteur, I put forward this pillar on children and youth, on the next generation, because if we would like to change the way we behave, our behavior for the future, and recognizing the importance to protect our planet and to have a sustainable development, the next generation should be part of that. Now, why is this a success at the European level, and why I believe that this solidarity exercise can be an example at the global scale? Because this is not only about fiscal sustainability, it was about convergence and cohesion, about bringing on private investment, bringing on national money as well. And these kind of incentives that we put forward led to the good governance that is so critical for this program. It led to ownership. The member states have been asked to draft national recovery and resilience plans in consultation with stakeholders, with local communities. And with these national recovery and resilience plans that were not just imposed top-down, but coming bottom-up in a manner in which everyone shared these 6 pillars and objectives, but at the same time they were doing the reforms and investment that were needed in order to increase the resilience. And I think that indeed this is a good example. And I will add, and this is very important, that the real disaster is when we lose hope. And this is something that the European Parliament thought to keep faith, to keep trust, to keep working to transform a crisis like COVID into opportunity. You need hope. And to find a solution on how to tackle the economic and social consequences, but also to fight inequality, to integrate the green and digital transition successfully in our lives, but at the same time to provide a better and brighter, prosperous future for the next generation. This is the EU experience. Of course, right now, it's ongoing. We have 2 years already from when we adopted it. We already have an implementation report, and I'm also co-rapporteur on that one. And I can tell you that it started. We are going to reach 100 billion euros that will be spent already as part of this recovery and resilience facility. So I'm more than thrilled to be able to tell you about that. One last thing, which is I think, very important, it's about institutions and the capacity of institutions. I believe that if we would like to have resilience and the weight for recovery, we need to focus on increasing the administrative capacity. And for that, it's very important, if we want to come back stronger, to become more resilient in the long term, we need to invest in the public institutions, in the cooperation in between the public and the private sector, in the civil society effort as well. So only in this way, using this synergy and solidarity, we'll be able to achieve. We've proven that at EU level. We are willing to help, provide these models to everyone else, and together we can do that at the global scale, pave the way towards recovery through resilience and solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pislaru. You have mentioned COVID has changed everything, and I think all of us, that resonates to each and every one of us. And thank you for mentioning the packages that the European Union has put forward, very sizable. And also to mentioning that it's not only about the money. Money is important, but it's very much about how you use that money. And also the importance that you have mentioned of building social resilience. I think that's one of the COVID, what we have learned since COVID, that really the importance of building social resilience as well. And you have also mentioned that real disaster is when we lose hope, but after the 2 days here and having listened to so many of the panels and people talking, I would say that there's a lot of hope in these rooms, so it's very nice. Thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure to bring in Dr. Abu Al-Enain. Dr. Abu Al-Enain, with COVID-19 and the increasing impacts of climate change, the importance of well-functioning healthcare sector alongside medical supply logistics has become more than apparent. What are some of the lessons learned with regard to risk reduction that should be applied to strengthen the preparedness of health systems for the next pandemic? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. It gives me a great pleasure to be here today. Indeed, the importance of well-functioning health system is undoubtful, regardless of the type of emergency, and with the demonstrated repercussions of the pandemic on different sectors, there were many lessons learned at different levels to share. To shed the light on some of these lessons, supporting preparedness effort to any emerging pandemics from our experience in Saudi Arabia, it can be presented on different areas. I'm going to talk about planning, governance, health system financing, information technology, medical supply. So starting with planning, the incorporation of biological hazards to the overall national preparedness strategies is very important. Early leadership engagement, political will, are keys to facilitate and encourage community engagement, in turn, and evidently strengthening national response to future similar challenges. Governance, multi-sectorial coordination in all phases of emergency management, as well as governmental private sector partnership, as we heard, is of paramount importance in several aspects in the overall emergency response, specifically in health system resilience and capacity management. Health system financing, providing flexible options for local health systems while strengthening local system resilience. Information technology, encouraging the digitalization of health system emergency management processes is a game changer. The examples are many in Saudi Arabia that wrote success stories dealing with the pandemic, from mobile application as توكلنا تطمن صحتي to the emergency management system we have, تأهب. Furthermore, the investment in technology in health system and emergency management remain wise national preparedness strategy. Medical supplies and equipment. Another area of private governmental partnership and multi-sectorial coordination that has a huge implication in the overall emergency preparedness. Encouraging the local industries and markets to fulfill and participate in health system supplies demand is proven nationally to be more of sustainable approach. Last but not least, healthcare and healthcare providers. Specialties distribution equity and system reorganization at local levels to support access to care, especially for the vulnerable groups, as well as minimize referrals to avoid health system stress and breakdown during pandemics and climate change related emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have mentioned that early leadership early leadership engagement is important, and the political will. And another topic that you have mentioned that has also been coming out of other panelists today is the importance of governance and governance in health system. And you have mentioned at local levels, it's very important to also focus on digitalization of health system. That's one of the lessons learned of COVID. Thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure to return to you, Minister. Minister, I'd like to ask you what is needed in terms of capacity and knowledge to ensure that public and private sector investments in recovery are forward-looking, account for future risks, and build resilience. In particular, what is needed to ensure that recovery actions in the least developed countries and small island developing states in particular will strengthen economic resilience in the face of climate change? The floor is yours.
Thank you once again, Madam Moderator. Again, let me, although the question focuses on recovery, but I would like to approach it by not only looking at post-disaster, whatever recovery, but of course, let's also look at pre-disaster, because there's a lot that we can do now to influence the future. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. And therefore, we need to look at pre-disaster times as well. Let me say, for example, in small island developing states, we have issues with existing infrastructure. I've talked about the new norm. We can have 3 months rainfall in 5 hours. That's what's in Fiji and some other small island states. It overwhelms the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure. And most of these are damaged as well, and of course, it leads to significant economic losses. So, development, what do we need to do with existing infrastructure which are not designed for today's environment, given the threat and the challenges that we face? 2, that will also influence new development. It's not only post-disaster recovery, but new developments. As I've stated earlier in my earlier intervention, risk-informed development. Let's not just do development for the sake of doing resilience, sustainability, and of course, respecting humanitarian principles. So, new developments. And while still on new developments, if I also mention here, Madam Moderator, because most of these will be dependent on financing as well. When we are doing partnerships, please, this is our plea. Let's align with the national priorities. national priorities should be our priorities. We welcome assistance, we welcome investments, but not to be decided and dictated by the partner that is helping. We need to ensure that our assistance, particularly in development to ensure resilience in the future, is aligned with national priorities. 3, people and social structure. We can have the best systems, we can have the best processes, we can have all the technology that we need, and we can have all the finances that we have, but we need to cultivate the people. For sustainability, we also need to seriously look at the people. When we had Cyclone Winston, we came up with this statement: build back better and stronger. Although Winston was strong enough to take away 44 lives and wipe away a third of our GDP within 36 hours or so, but we are stronger than Winston. We need to cultivate the people. So it's the structures and the social and the capacity development is, and resilience in the economy. That is very much linked to the infrastructure that I've spoken about as well. When it comes to the public and the private sector investments, I'll deal with the private sector investments later, but as I've stated, our disaster risk reduction policy has identified this, and of course we also need to look at the PTNA, the post-disaster needs assessment. That should drive the recovery framework. I say that again, the post-disaster needs assessment must drive the recovery framework. Because in the PTNA, the damages have been identified and the losses have also been identified. Significant economic losses. The private sector needs the environment to be created. And that environment will be created first by the public sector investment and of course the policies that come with it as well, again driven by the PDNA and the recovery framework. And of course, what is also important in here, Madam Moderator, is again the stakeholders and the partnership. But let me come back to the crux of the question and focus again on some of the key elements within that. Resilient infrastructure, as I've stated, not just doing development for the sake of doing development. In Fiji now, based on PDNA and so forth, when we are doing new development, say for example, housing, or for the tourism sector, instead of running the cable using posts, we are running the cable underground. That brings economic resilience, and of course the services are not affected. Come the next one, those are some of the resilient infrastructures that we need. And of course we can talk more and add more to the list, but that's just perhaps an example of the resilient infrastructure that we need to invest in so that it can also bring in that macro level economic resilience as well. Small island developing states and landlocked countries, the principles remain the same. And of course, I've talked about creating the environment for the private sector. They will need effective climate and disaster risk finance and insurance solutions. Things like parametric macro insurance and so forth. Risk reduction investments to be supported by international donors and through access to green climate funds. These are some things that our private sector would need. Capital markets can be harnessed as a reliable source of climate finance. In Fiji, we had the bonds and the contracts that government came up with to help raise additional finance to fill the resourcing gap that we have. The Fijian government issued the 100 million Fiji sovereign green bond in November of 2017, and in doing so, Fiji became the first emerging market in the world to issue a green bond. And it was a success, receiving strong market interest from domestic and international investors alike. All bond issuances were oversubscribed. Those are some of the things that we can take seriously in order to address the issues raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Strong words, preparedness. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. That is very much in the heart of the discussions that we have here. To have risk-informed development policies and resilience building needs to be aligned with national priorities and looking for people-centered policies. And you have also mentioned how important it is to create the enabling environment for private sector to come in and support the government efforts. Thank you very much for those words. Now it's my great pleasure to go back to Mr. Pislaru. Mr. Pislaru, how can development cooperation and foreign direct investment be a catalyst for building resilient economies in least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states in a post-disaster context? So what are the opportunities and challenges?
Indeed, we are right now at a moment in which we can transform the lessons from COVID, because I'm going to go back to this COVID experience. It's really very rich in terms of the lessons learned. And I believe that the key thing when we are talking about recovery is indeed, as the minister said before, is not just to go back and rebuild, but to do something better and stronger, as you have mentioned. What does it mean exactly? It means that if you would like to build something sustainable and also take advantage of the things that happened during COVID, there is a dual transition that we at the European Union level, we are embracing right now really strongly, the green and digital transition. Now, the green part is clear for everyone, it's addressing climate change. But what is also important is that the green component is not just about emissions or things like that. It's about the way in which we behave and we assume that behavior. And for that, I will give you an example, because you need to have a mix of incentives on one hand, and indeed this is about green bonds, sustainable finance, guarantees, but you need to also have rules or legislation reform. And we've been working at the EU level on what is called, for instance, the corporate sustainability reporting, which means that when we talk about FDIs originating from the European Union, we would like to see respect for employees. We would like to see respect for human rights. We would like to see the way in which the environmental matters are taken into account by companies. Of course, we start with large companies, listed companies, but the plan is to create this behavioral change also at the private sector level to be sure that when we do investments, these investments are going to be really thriving in the local communities and building in synergy with the local community and not being considered as being negative for that particular community. The other important thing is the digital component, and I would like to highlight that because we have been talking a lot about climate change, but the digital component is very important. And why it's important? I will give 3 reasons for that. First, is the fact that especially for landlocked countries or small islands, it really is leveling the playing field in terms of connectivity and the way in which opportunities and access is provided, especially for the most vulnerable people in their society. So access to digital skills is going to provide unprecedented opportunities for those particular countries. And I think that this kind of investment should be at the front of any kind of investment that we put forward for our strategy for recovery. And which is really important it's the entire concept of education. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we had this amazing community effort from the universities all around the world, putting forward, and not only university level, but also high school level as well, putting forward an abundance of resources for everyone in the world. And that was amazing. Things that would have been completely inaccessible before were made public, and this behavior still remains. And this is again a gesture of solidarity and accessibility of resources that can be very important for those that have less chances to reach these kind of resources. Last but not least, this is something that it's a game changer in terms of how we see development cooperation in the future. EU is an important actor in that. So what we would like to do is, by learning our own lessons of solidarity, we would like to be, in the future, acting on promoting this green and digital transformation in the future. And one important thing that we are promoting, and I can tell you from the perspective that I have as chair of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, is that we will really like to have a children and next generation agenda that would be pushed further. And we believe that opportunities for children and allowing children all across the world to have these opportunities is critical for what we've been discussing here, the medium and long-term perspective for the recovery. This is not just a short exercise of, a couple of months or years. This is something that is changing the paradigm for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, building back better, I think that's something we hear at the UN all the time. What do we mean by it, and how do we really truly build back better and stronger? How do we learn? And you have mentioned that, of course, it's important to have these green measures by the governments, but also we need behavioral change to support sustainability agenda at all levels. And there needs to be incentives for that, but also the structure of the government reform, legislative reform as well. And you have talked about the importance of connectivity. I think connectivity is absolutely key for these countries, vulnerable countries. And in order to have that connectivity, it has to be affordable. And it also has to be something that there has to be training for people to really be able to how to access and use that digital connectivity. Very important points there. Thank you very much. I would now like to go back to Dr. Liu. I hope that you are still with us. And Dr. Liu, governments and stakeholders will gather in Kunming, China later this year to adopt a new international biodiversity framework. What role can nature-based solutions play in resilient recovery, and how should risk reduction and resilience measures be integrated into this new biodiversity framework? The floor is yours.
Thank you for your question. Biodiversity conservation is the practice of protecting and preserving the wealth and a variety of species, habitats, ecosystems, and genetic diversity on our planet. It is very important for us to protect the biodiversity. And in order to improve biodiversity governance, China has made a lot of efforts. For example, the protection of the giant pandas in China. Pandas is a species that has been reclassified from endangered to vulnerable after decades of effort to keep it from extinction. Many of the world's ecosystems have undergone significant degradation with negative impacts on biodiversity and people's livelihoods. As I mentioned earlier, ecosystem restoration is an important approach of conservation and sustainable development. Ecosystem restoration is one type of nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions involve working with nature to address social challenges, providing benefits for both human well-being and biodiversity. In addition to ecosystem restoration, there are other nature-based solution approaches. For example, the green infrastructure like rain garden, green roof, and also ecosystem-based adaptation, mitigation, and also disaster risk reduction, integrated water resources management, protected area management, etc. Needs-based solutions are very important for achieving the biodiversity conservation objectives and also sustainably tackling wider social, economic, and environmental challenges. So as the world seeks to build back better from the current pandemic crisis, it is important to invest in nature-based solutions. And the restored habitats can enhance biodiversity levels, help remove CO2 from atmosphere, help us to address climate change by restoring carbon. Conserving intact ecosystems such as mangroves can help biodiversity conservation and also help reduce the disastrous impacts of climate change, including flooding and storm surges. Green infrastructure is also more flexible and cost-effective for providing many benefits, including biodiversity protection. So we believe that nature-based solutions will play a key role in the green recovery. This year, world leaders and stakeholders will come to the Kunming city in China to adopt a new framework for protecting the world's biodiversity. And this framework sets out an ambitious plan to ensure that by 2050, the shared vision of living in harmony with nature is fulfilled. So we need to invest in nature. Hence, it is important to integrate nature-based solutions into this new biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu, emphasizing the importance of protecting biodiversity and also the importance of investing in nature-based solutions. Thank you very much. So my final question in this panel session will go to Dr. Avoelan. We know the climate change is going to have an increasingly negative impact on public health, such as heat waves, sand and dust storms, and waterborne diseases, just to name a few. Are national health systems ready for climate change? And how can we use this moment of COVID-19 recovery to ensure health systems are prepared for the impacts of the climate crisis?
Thank you very much. Although the effort spent, there is a work to be done to reach global health system readiness climate change's challenges. We at the National Health Operations Center, a recent WHO collaboration center in emergency and disaster management, and the first in the Eastern Mediterranean region, our efforts and strategies had been driven by the alignment with the ambitious vision of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia 2030. The National Health Emergency Operations Center Climate Crisis Related Events Management strategies has the following dimensions. Talks about mitigations, preparedness, response, and recovery. When it comes to mitigations, continuous health system risk assessment and the application of necessary structural and non-structural mitigation strategies. Strengthening of surveillance and early warning systems. When it comes to preparedness, implementation the concept of all hazards approach of emergency management. Comprehensive emergency planning. Also, governance, regulations, legislations, and compliance processes review at the level of Ministry of Health with alignment with the national governmental directions. Capacity building plans at strategic, operational, and tactical levels. For the response, Multi-sectorial coordination, again, is of paramount importance. Continuous crisis and emergency risk communications. Last but not least, for the recovery, the early planning for recovery as part of the overall planning process. Recovery of all and from all, not only from the climate change crisis, not only from the pandemic, but for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, emphasizing the importance of comprehensive emergency planning and the role of that in building better healthcare structures. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the panel discussion, and we will now move into the question and answer session. And I will open the floor for questions you may have for our panelists. I will take a few questions at a time from the Q&A that is provided me by the organizers through this link on my screen, and I will direct them to the panelists. There are three questions right now to you panelists. One is directed to Mr. Pislaru, but the two others are to all of you, and I will go through them and then I will give the floor to you. So the two ones that I would like to hear from you panelists is any strategies on addressing underlying inequalities and risk factors, including access to resources for building resilience of women recovery frameworks. So gender approach in recovery, I think that's what the question is relating to. And the other question that is to all of the panelists is how can recovery strategies be used to strengthen resilience of key infrastructure sectors? So how can recovery strategies be used to strengthen resilience of key infrastructure sectors? And Mr. Pislaru, the question to you is, how prepared is the European Union to support funding of Africa, Far East Asia for resilience and reconstruction? How prepared is the European Union to support funding of Africa and Far East Asia for resilience and reconstruction? So I will start with Mr. Minister. If you have any reflections on the two questions that have been put forward to all the panelists, I will give you the floor first.
Thank you. On the first question, which focuses more on gender approach on recovery, I wish to assure all that in this journey, we do not intend to leave anyone behind. In the words of my Prime Minister, we are all in the same canoe. That is the traditional boats that we have in the islands. And we need to all paddle the canoe together. We all have responsibilities, and it's an all-inclusive approach, not only in our recovery plans, but of course, pre-disaster plans as well. In Fiji, we have a national gender policy, and that perhaps drives all the activities, not only post-disasters, but in all government ministries and agencies, all stakeholders, under that national gender policy. We fully understand that women particularly are vulnerable during disasters. And there are also recovery strategies in place. I would use a few examples in Fiji, the Cash for Work program. Again, thankful to the partnerships, where women, while going recovery activities, whether it be cleaning up, whether it be replanting in their plantations, they are paid cash so that they address their issues, but of course at the same time they are earning as well so that they can support their family. It's important that we develop our women. I always make this statement in one of the conferences that I attended in Rome a few years back. The president of IFAD, I liked what he said when we were talking about women in development. According to him, when we develop a man, my apologies to men, we are developing an individual. But when we develop women, we are developing a community. So we have programs and strategies in place to help the vulnerable, and particularly our women and children, of course. How can recovery strategy improve key infrastructure sectors? Again, as I have stated, what will help us is identification of the risks and the hazards, vulnerability mapping, so that we can also come up with the right interventions. Not only that, but identification of the right technologies and allocating the appropriate resources so that it can be completed, it can be implemented. Because infrastructures are critical, and it helps in the continued provision of services. It creates the environment for growth and continued development. Therefore, we need to improve on our key infrastructures. And as I have stated earlier, in our case as a small island developing states, it's not only new infrastructure, but even existing infrastructure. What needs to be done in order for them to be improved? But of course, building back better is important. Let's not repeat the same mistakes, but for resilience and of course for sustainability, although it costs more, but we have to do it because we need to ensure that we have the proper infrastructures in place and utilities as well, so that we can continue with our development aspirations. Because if this is not addressed, every disaster will mean losses in years of development and of course affects the delivery of services by government as well. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I will now move to Dr. Liu. Any reflections on the two questions that were posed to all the panelists, if you are still with us?
Thank you. So the two questions, the first one is about the gender issue. And I also agree that female education is extremely
I do not see
important.
Dr. Liu, so I will then go to Dr. Abu Al-Enain. Any comments from your?
Sure.
And I will come back to you, Dr. Liu, as I can see you are now.
Okay. Sure. Quick comments for the equity. It starts all with leadership, political will, and community engagement, and setting the right standards. And it's not only about females. It's about, as we've heard, the most vulnerable groups, the elderly, the children, the women, and the people who are foreigners in a country that they don't belong to. So setting these standards, we have a good example for the time's sake. And the second question, recovery and infrastructure. And I just want to mention two words. Identify the gaps and set priorities, because you can't really fix everything. And today, or I think yesterday, I heard a very nice term. Let's not use the word building back, building forward, and I really like it. Because what we build back sometimes what brought us here today. So identify the gaps and set your priorities.
Thank you very much. So building forward better. Thank you. Dr. Liu, it's a pleasure to see you. You have just, yes, you are there with us on the screen. Any reflections on the two questions that were posed?
Okay, thank you for the two questions. The first one, the gender issue. I also think the female education is extremely important. Like in China, the female illiteracy rate for those above age 15 was roughly 90% in the early 1950s, but this rate decreased to about 7% in 2019, and in 2021, China scored 0.973 in the Global Gender Gap report released by the World Economic Forum, and the total score is 1. So I think this female education is very important for the societal development and specific for the economic development in China. And the second question is about the infrastructure. And in fact, in the past, we have built a lot of human-made engineering infrastructures. But in the future, I think we need to focus more on green infrastructure. The green infrastructure is a type of nature-based solutions. We need to rely on nature more. We need to invest more in nature. So green infrastructure is a very important direction for our economic development in future.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to turn to Mr. Pislaru. You are free to answer the questions to all, but also in particular the question that was put forward to you about how prepared European Union is to support the funding in Africa and Far East Asia for resilience and reconstruction.
Let me start with this one, because this was a more concrete question. How prepared is? I mean, certainly we are not doing enough. I don't want to claim something else. And from the European Parliament position and from the DEVE committee that is really an AFET committee that are dealing with that, certainly we have bigger ambitions. Now, this doesn't mean that we are not doing things. I think that it's very relevant to understand that we do have an Africa-EU partnership, and we even have an EU external investment plan with 5.4 billion euro that has been put into that. And with the kind of financial instruments that are about leveraging. So it's 5.4 billion that are supposed to bring, with guarantees and blended finance, about 54 billion in terms of public-private investment. It has a technical assistance component, and indeed it has an investment climate component that has been well developed. This type of partnership is, though, just the emergence of what we would like to see in the European Parliament and in terms of the development of this relation with Africa. The relation, in terms of relation with the Asian Pacific or Asian countries, Far East Asia, we do have, I mean, I think that at the same time when we're approving the Recovery and Resilience Facility, second half of 2020, that we finally concluded a strategic partnership with ASEAN, which was a very important thing to do. And then it's still, you know, in there, the purpose of having a region-to-region FTA free trade area with the Asia-Pacific countries. We are still working at that, and I know that there are a lot of efforts, and I will hope that this would be happening very soon. Now, let me just touch very briefly on at least one of the other questions related to the gender dimension. I'm really glad to share with you how the gender dimension has been embedded in the Recovery and Resilience Facility negotiation. So we, from the European Parliament side, have asked not less than an ex-ante assessment of each of the national recovery and resilience plans on how it impacts the gender dimension. To be more clear, to be sure, ex ante, in the design of the national recovery and resilience plans, that we are not, again, missing the gender dimension, and we will look at how many jobs are created for women and what will be the impact from a gender perspective. Now, negotiations are negotiations. I mean, when you have a complicated system where you have a co-legislator, so the parliament and the council, you may need to have a compromise reached there. So indeed, we were not able to reach the ex-ante impact assessment, but we put there the condition to have an ex-post, so we will have an impact assessment to understand how it works. And we also made a mandatory requirement that in the plans, this would be presented. So the member states, the countries will need to explain how they have thought about this gender dimension. So it was not in the end a criteria of evaluation of the plans or an ex-ante, but still we've made a breakthrough, because this was the first time at such a scale, again, 672.5 billion euros, where we embedded clearly this gender assessment and gender dimension. So this was my answer to the gender question. Related to critical infrastructure, just one word. I believe that when it comes to key infrastructures and critical infrastructures, right now we are at the development of a new paradigm. We have seen our interdependencies, the value chain issues at the global scale, and right now the kind of cooperation we have for these key infrastructures is unprecedented. We do have at EU level, through the commissioner that deals with industry, and also, of course, when it comes to communications, infrastructure, the 5G, 5+, but also in terms of transport. So we do have an eye on these critical or key infrastructures at EU level, and a very good cooperation worldwide to try to move that forward. So I think that this covers it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that unfortunately we don't have time to go to another round of Q&A, but it has been really interesting to hear the reflections that the panelists have given on the Q&A session as well. So before handing over to the panel for any final conclusions or reflections that you might have, I would like to share the Slido results with you. For question 1, 90% of international support for post-disaster recovery is allocated to emergency response versus only 6% to reconstruction and rehabilitation. And for question 2, estimated economic losses for disasters reached around 171.3 billion US dollars, I presume, in 2020, not accounting for the COVID-19 pandemic. So the results of the World Cloud are now shown on the screen, and you can see it all there.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusive.
And the word is inclusive planning comes in the forefront. Thank you very much. Build Back Better was the other one. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure to invite our panelists to give any closing reflections that you might have on key conclusions or recommendations after you've heard also the other panelists speak. And I will begin with you, Mr. Minister. You have the floor.
I'll just make two simple statements. One, again, as we have discussed, building resilience through recovery requires a long-term strategy to systematically reduce our vulnerability and to ensure that we reduce climate and disaster risks, and therefore risk-informed development is particularly the way to go. It's very important. And secondly, partnerships and promoting international cooperation is crucial for a more resilient world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I would now move to Dr. Liu, if we can have you on the screen. Any final concluding remarks from you?
Okay, thank you. I would like to conclude with 3 pieces of messages. First, we need policies, measures, and incentives from all governments for green recovery. And China has paid special attention to carbon neutrality and ecosystem restoration in recent years. Second, nature-based solutions will play a key role in biodiversity conservation and in tackling social, economic, and environmental challenges. Last but not least, many ecosystems have been seriously damaged in our planet. We need to set guidelines and standards for ecosystem restoration and other nature-based solutions to achieve the goals of green recovery and biodiversity conservation. When we start to collaborate, we are on the way of success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being there through video with us, Mr. Liu. Now, next, I would like to invite Mr. Pislaru for any final conclusions.
Yeah. Indeed, I think that it's just suited to say that the EU is right now putting forward a very impressive and ambitious framework. We have not done it yet. It's still underway. And the kind of insights we are going to have from this exercise is going to be very, very impactful at worldwide level. And we would like to be there in partnership at global level and to ensure that we contribute. Now, one important idea that I would like to put forward is the importance of education. This thing that we are talking here about, to be very honest, is like with the insurance approach. If we are going, and this is the elephant in the room, if we are going to have this belief that it will not happen to me, my house will not burn, my bike will not be stolen, or this kind of attitude, then we are not going to do prevention. And that's the type of behavior that you will be able to instill if you will create education about climate change, about the nature, about what is, how to build the design for adaptation and prevention. And I think it's really suitable to start with the next generation, as we have started to do in the EU. And I really love the result of the Slido exercise, because it was about inclusive planning. And I would like to share, as a final remark, the fact that if we will include and share these design exercises with our youth, I believe that the results would be better and the focus will be more on prevention and adaptation. And the involvement of the next generation is really critical for the future. It's usually sometimes that we are saying that the young generation will inherit the future. But the reality is that they are much more aware of what is happening around us than many other generations. And I think that the youth involvement and next generation involvement and education and investment in education is critical for both the design, but especially for the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, I would like to invite Dr. Abu El-Anein. Any final reflections?
Thank you very much. I just want to emphasize in 2 to 3 things. The first thing, again, emphasize on the information technology. Investment in this category is a game changer. Digitalization of the processes and how you handle and manage disaster is just amazing. Second, I really concur what you said in terms of capacity building plans at all levels, starting from leaders to mid-levels, to community, to school students. And that's it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, I think we've had an excellent discussion today, and I thank you all for being here. in the room with us, and to all of those who are participating online, thank you for being with us. I think I would like to invite you all to give a round of applause to our great panelists.